Investigators in Nevada are probing the secret life of the gunman in Sunday night's Las Vegas massacre as they try to come up with a motive for the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history. Welcome to Happening Now. I'm John Scott.
And I'm Melissa Francis. Law enforcement revealing new details on the killing spree and saying the gunman may not have acted alone. They also say that Stephen Paddock rented an apartment overlooking another music festival 1 week earlier. Investigators think he planned to escape after Sunday's attack, but turned the gun on himself as police closed in. President Trump and the First Lady traveling to Las Vegas yesterday to meet with survivors and first responders. The president praising the city and all those who put their lives on the line to save others.
I will tell you, the people of Nevada and the extraordinary city have shown the world their incredible character, courage, and resolve. Nevada really is a very, very special place. I'm honored to be here today at the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department in the company of heroes.
White House correspondent Kevin Corke joins us live with more. Kevin.
Good morning, Melissa. You're right. The president's message was a simple and yet poignant one. You are not alone, and we will never leave your side. That's the message from not just the president, but also from the First Lady, as they did meet with those first responders, police officers, and victims of Sunday's massacre in Las Vegas. This, of course, happens amid renewed scrutiny over gun laws, assault weapons, and, of course, the so-called bump stocks that the gunman apparently used in that Las Vegas hotel. Now, let me share just a bit, as is customary. The president took to Twitter to talk about his thoughts, taking his thoughts to the world. He said this to the American people in particular: so wonderful to be in Las Vegas yesterday and meet with people, from police to doctors to the victims themselves, who I will never forget. The impact of the shooting felt across the globe as the president and First Lady promised to do all they could to comfort the hurting and support law enforcement as they continued to look for clues about the killer, his motive, and any possible links to others who may have helped or inspired him.
On behalf of the grateful nation, Melania and I thank each and every one of you in law enforcement. In the depths of horror, we will always find hope in the men and women who risk their lives for ours.
Indeed, a sentiment shared by so many across the globe. Meanwhile, the gunman's use of a bump stock to convert his weapon from semi-automatic to nearly fully automatic has inspired some to ask for a ban on its use. And while the White House is not calling for that, Kellyanne Conway said something interesting this morning. She said it doesn't mean the administration isn't open to hearing from all sides of the issue.
We always welcome a thoughtful conversation on policy and issues. The Second Amendment is a bedrock within our Constitution, along with the First Amendment, and these rights must be protected.
These rights must be protected. So to be clear, any conversation about an assault weapons ban or bump stocks ban or anything else that happens like that clearly would take place down Pennsylvania over on Capitol Hill. And if the past is any indication of the future, unfortunately, that could be a very long and difficult conversation. Melissa?
There you go. All right, Kevin Corke, thank you.
President Trump turning the page on the controversy over his handling of Puerto Rico by taking on the role of comforter-in-chief during his visit to Las Vegas. The president vowing to stand by the side of the victims and heroes of Sunday's deadly violence.
What message did you have for them, Mr. President?
Well, I think the only message I can say is that we're with you 100%. We are, in fact, I invited a lot of them over to the White House. I said, if you're ever in Washington, come on over to the Oval Office. And they're all saying, we want to do it. How do we do it? And believe me, I'll be there for them. But the message that I have is we have a great country, and we are there for you.
Joining us now, Karl Rove, former senior advisor and deputy chief of staff to President George W. Bush, also a Fox News contributor. As you well know, Karl, the commander-in-chief often becomes the consoler-in-chief. How is this one doing?
Well, yesterday we saw President Trump take on the two forms of that role. There's a formal role which he gave in his prepared remarks at the Metropolitan Police Department, which I thought were superb. He's not comfortable reading off a transcript, but you could tell as he read that these were his words, his thoughts, his emotions. They came across as authentic, and I thought they were powerful. But there was a second role, and you just showed it, the informal role At the end of the first event he had, which was with the doctors and the health professionals at the hospital, he got to joking about how he'd gone through the ward and had sort of said, if you're ever in Washington, stop by. And everybody said, well, we want to come to the White House. So there's an informal side to this, too. And we saw it yesterday with the president joking about this. We saw it at the police department as well when he turned around and put his hand on the shoulder of the police chief. You could tell they had an authentic bond there. He was joking with the mayor of Las Vegas, who's she's been a particular critic of the president's for a long time, but yet they obviously had a warm banter back and forth there. So we're seeing the president in both roles as comforter in chief, the formal role, giving prepared remarks, and the informal role, sort of the back and forth. And we're likely to hear more about the informal role in the days ahead as people in those wards begin to talk about their personal visit from the president.
He has been savaged on late-night television, including by Jimmy Kimmel. But on this particular visit, on the Las Vegas visit, Kimmel gave him props. Said the president did well.
Yeah, well, that says something, because Kimmel, as you say, has been a particularly tough critic of the president. And look, the president has had some missteps along the way, but good for Kimmel that he was willing to at least acknowledge that the president did what everybody else in America already knew, which was had a good day in Las Vegas, doing exactly what we expect to hear from the president. And I got to say, I really was taken by his prepared remarks, because, again, they were invested with so much, they covered so much, yet they were relatively brief. But the words were strong. I mean, I was particularly taken. We struggle for the words to explain to our children how such evil can exist, but we cannot be defined by the evil that threatens us or the violence that incites such terror. I mean, that really, I thought, was a strong presentation by the president.
Let's talk about some of the palace intrigue that's bedeviling this White House. Every White House gets to deal with this kind of stuff. Yesterday, there was a report that the Secretary of State had nearly resigned and had used an unflattering term regarding the president. Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, then came out with a news conference while President Trump was in the air to deny any reports of that rift. Here's what he had to say.
There were some news reports this morning that I want to address. First, my commitment to the success of our president and our country is as strong as it was the day I accepted his offer. I think it's the most important element of the article is to reaffirm my commitment to this role that President Trump's asked me to serve, and to dispel with this notion that I have ever considered leaving. I have answered that question repeatedly. For some reason, it continues to be misreported. There's never been a consideration in my mind to leave. I serve at the appointment of the president, and I'm here for as long as the president feels I can be useful to achieving his objectives. I'm not going to deal with petty stuff like that. I mean, this is what I don't understand about Washington. Again, I'm not from this place, but the places I come from, we don't deal with that kind of petty nonsense. And it is intended to do nothing but divide people. And I'm just not going to be part of this effort to divide this administration.
And despite those denials, there's still all kinds of speculation you can read in the papers today that Tillerson will be out after a year, that kind of thing. Give us your take on it, Carl.
Well, first of all, look, the media love Republican on Republican violence. And they love, even more than that, they love acrimony inside a Republican administration. You'll notice that these comments that were leaked to the paper supposedly were about a meeting earlier this summer. This White House, until recent, has been filled with people who seem to be interested more in leaking on their so-called adversaries within the administration than in doing their job. Those people are largely now gone. So my suspicion is that we will see smoother waters ahead. I think the Secretary was absolutely right to take this on head on. I know him personally. He's a pretty direct guy. If he had feelings, he'd express them to the president. I'm willing to take a bet that the end of the year we'll find Rex Tillerson still in as Secretary of State and still doing his job, and God bless him for doing so.
Yeah, and interesting, too, he said, I'm not from this place and I don't deal that way. I mean, that's the kind of attitude that President Trump wanted to bring to Washington, call it drain the swamp, if you will, but bringing in some people from outside government to those high government posts. And I thought Tillerson handled that part of it very well.
Yeah, and I thought it was also smart. He sent our former Fox colleague Heather Nauert out to follow up with it. She was asked specifically about, did he say this about the president? And she said no. And I think he was absolutely right to say, look, where I come from, we don't get involved in that petty nonsense. And it was good for him to stay out of it. It was good for her to give the explicit denial. But look, I think those stories were more about settling old scores. Somebody who used to be in the White House went out there and leaked it to the press, gave a spin on it to make Tillerson look bad, tried to encourage antagonism between he and the man that he serves, the President of the United States, and keep him from serving his ultimate boss, the people of the United States. And that didn't happen, and it won't happen. Rex Tillerson is motivated by a strong sense of patriotism and duty and service, and the President of the United States asked him to put those values to work for our country, and Rex will do it until the moment the President asks him to go or the moment that Rex thinks it's time for him to go, but that ain't going to be soon.
Yeah, because as you point out, it took, 4 or 5 months for details of this supposed conversation to come out.
And I learned this in Washington during my 7 years at the White House. There are lots of things that are said, and then they end up being transposed and transmuted and rendered into a form that you simply do not recognize. And that's the way Washington works. The White House I worked in was relatively free of those kind of inter-office, inter-administration squabbles. This administration started out with a lot of backfighting. General Kelly, as Chief of Staff, has brought an end to most of that, but we're still going to see the debris as people sort of mine their own anger at being forced out of the administration and use that anger and channel it towards somebody else who's still in.
Is that why you're down there in Austin these days, Carl?
When I left the White House, I recognized while Washington's a wonderful place to visit, it's not a great place to live, and I'm a Texan, so I came home to Austin, Texas.
All right. Born in Colorado, though, I might add.
That's right, and I used to watch your dad every Saturday morning on television. As you and I both know, your dad was a great hero of mine. I look forward to my Saturdays with your pop.
All right, well, thank you, Karl Rove. I'm sure he's listening. Thanks.
Bye.
So new details in the killer clown murder case. The punishment prosecutors want for the woman who's accused of dressing in a costume and killing a romantic rival. Plus, 100,000 pages of documents and 100 witnesses later, there is still no evidence of Russian collusion. Now the Senate Intelligence Committee announcing the probe is expanding.
The issue of collusion is still open, that we continue to investigate both intelligence and witnesses, and that we're not in a position where we will come to any type of temporary finding on that.
Right now, new information on some crime stories we're following. Florida prosecutors are asking for the death penalty for a woman accused of dressing up like a clown and killing the wife of a man she later married. Sheila Warren's attorney says she vehemently denies killing Marlene Warren in 1990 and will plead not guilty. A search for a missing 28-year-old woman in Indiana. Police in Michigan City say Amanda Bolka missed a very important meeting and her family has not heard from her in several days. And deliberations resume today in the case of a man accused of killing his ex-girlfriend and leading police on the longest manhunt in Maine history. Prosecutors say Robert Burton shot the woman in 2015 out of jealousy. The defense argues he acted in self-defense after she shot him first.
So breaking details on an attack in Africa that left 3 Green Berets dead and 2 others injured. Military officials say the group was ambushed in Niger during a training mission with local troops. Andrew Peak is a former U.S. Army intelligence officer and a fellow at the Clements Center for National Security. One of the most troubling details about this story is that they were on this training mission, so they couldn't have been easy to find when they were ambushed. Isn't that, I mean, that's worrisome, isn't it?
It's extremely worrisome. You know, usually when we see special forces deaths like this, they are on a raid against a hardened target, like an al-Qaeda compound. Very, very rarely, I can't think of any in my experience, have there been a combat death on a training mission for these kind of internal defense patrols and advisory missions that the Green Berets do so well. It really speaks to the ability of the jihadists to gain intelligence about where our forces are in some of these countries.
And it also tells you that at this point they have no borders. I mean, they're sort of moving into all new territory, especially when it comes to Africa. How big of a problem is that?
That's right. I mean, the counterterrorism problem in Africa is such a challenge because these states that you see on the map, these kind of big rectangles, are not big rectangles. That's not what they look like. What they look like is isolated settlements covering with a lot of restricted terrain in between that jihadists can go from one to the other very easily. State borders don't really exist. Thus, when you hit them very hard in one place, like Mali, like the French did a few years ago, they moved to other places. They moved to Nigeria, which has a terrorist problem of its own, and now they moved to Niger, which has an incredibly weak central government and where we've really had to expand our advisory mission.
Yeah, so, I mean, what's the right response?
Well, I think under Obama, you saw an expansion of these missions the Green Berets do so well. The advise and assist local militaries in building up their internal security. I think shredding the leadership networks of ISIS and groups like Boko Haram will be helpful. But I think overall it's a long-term governance issue to improve the governance of these states such that they can control their territory. Meanwhile,
the Russian investigation expands as the Senate Intelligence Committee says it has yet to find any evidence of collusion. The chairman of that Senate Intel Committee saying himself that, well, they're not going to share what they have so far. You know, it doesn't mean they should stop looking. What do you think about that?
Look, I think the Senate's really hard-pressed to justify why it has an investigation going when the special counsel also has an investigation going with, by the way, many more resources. I mean, the fact that Senator Burr, as been reported, says he can't be sure that they'll have wrapped up the investigation by the midterms, right? So that's 2 years running, says to me, this is a little bit of a drawn-out fishing expedition. I think really they have to, the onus is on them to explain why their efforts that are in parallel with Robert Mueller's efforts should be sustained.
Yeah, not that it's not an important topic, but you get the sense that these investigations only expand, they only go on, they only get bigger, and you know, there's so much duplicity between them. You wonder if it's worth this much time and effort, even though it is, you know, an important thought, but what do you think?
Well, no, I think that's true. And the problem with Senate investigations and any congressional investigation is that because you have it bifurcated politically and because the representatives are more responsive to the people, they are so much leakier. I mean, these investigations leak like crazy in a way that, you know, whatever you might think about Bob Mueller, really his group hasn't leaked that much.
Yeah. Andrew, are you on the road today for a special reason by any chance?
I am. I'm actually in Dallas to try to convince a girl to marry me. It's not a sure thing. There's, you know, another suitor in the picture.
No.
So, but look, yeah, there are. So I'm trying to muscle them out on your show, you know, possibly with the help of your audience. They're very data-driven, her and her family. So I think any amount of tweets and so forth would help.
Wow.
But, you know, Amy Bradshaw, if you're out there, I'm the guy for you.
Amy Bradshaw, how could you possibly turn Andrew down? I know the whole audience is going to put all kinds of pressure on you now. We're all going to tweet. This poor rival. I didn't know there was another rival in the picture. My goodness. You're really bringing the big guns.
Don't get me started.
Yeah. All right. Well, we look forward to hearing if she consents. Let us know.
All right.
See you
Thanks
soon.
so much.
All that Army training behind him, too.
Right.
Iraqi forces retake the last ISIS stronghold in the north, but the fight to drive out the terror army is far from over. And a sucker punch that put a victim in the hospital caught on camera. Police now asking for your help to find this attacker. Right now, a manhunt underway for a suspect caught on camera viciously sucker punching a man in Texas. You can see the attacker striking from behind, knocking the victim out cold. There are several witnesses, but no one tries to help the poor guy who's lying face down on the sidewalk. That victim spent several days in a hospital. Investigators say this is a serious assault and they want the suspect, Alejandro Maldonado, off the street. Police are asking anyone with info on his whereabouts to call detectives 832-595-3814.
So just in, Iraqi forces have recaptured a northern town from ISIS. It is near oil-rich Kirkuk, and it is thought to be the terror army's last stronghold in the area. Still, the fight rages on in pockets to the north and to the east. John Huddy is live in Jerusalem with more. John.
Yeah, well, Melissa, despite the ongoing fighting, this is really an important victory, retaking the city, not only for the Iraqi forces, but also for some of the Kurdish Peshmerga fighters. And really, in the fight against ISIS altogether, it's a very important strategic victory for those Iraqi forces that said that they liberated this city today. Now, that city we're talking about is the city of Hawija in Iraq. They, of course, declared this victory with help from coalition forces. The offensive to retake Hawija started September 21st, rather. It's been a tough fight because, as you mentioned, Melissa, this was one of ISIS's last strongholds in that region of Iraq. And if you look at the map, it sits between Mosul to the north and Baghdad about 130 miles or so to the south along Iraq's Highway 1. Now, this is an important and a major transportation corridor that ISIS used expensively when it took control of the region in 2014. And capturing Hawija, aside from the various strategic aspects, also puts Iraqi forces into contact or close to Kurdish Peshmerga fighters in nearby Kirkuk. As you mentioned, Melissa, this is the oil-rich region claimed by both the Kurdistan Regional Government, the KRG, and the Iraqi government, and remains an area of contention in the Kurdish fight for independence. And on that note, Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi said today that, quote, "We don't want any aggression or confrontations, but the federal authority must be imposed in the disputed areas." And he's really referencing, of course, again, the Kirkuk region. And this, Melissa, raising concerns about this region being a flashpoint for sectarian violence between forces and fighters that really, at this point, have shared the common enemy of ISIS. Melissa.
John Huddy, thank you for that.
The Las Vegas shooter used an aftermarket device to make his semi-automatic weapon fire just like an automatic one. Well, now Republicans in Congress are considering a gun control measure that would ban such bump stocks. We'll get into the debate on that. Plus, an update on the search for answers to the big question, why the shooter went on this deadly rampage.
Stephen Paddock is a man who spent decades acquiring weapons and ammo and living a secret life, much of which will never be fully understood. He meticulously planned on the worst domestic attack in United States history.
Investigators in Nevada still trying to figure out why a man opened fire Sunday from high above a concert on the Las Vegas Strip, killing 58 people and injuring hundreds more. Police body cam video capturing the officers responding to the shooting. They say that helped them figure out exactly how long the attacker kept shooting.
So at 10:05, the first shots fired by the suspect. This was seen on closed-circuit television from the concert venue. 10:12, first two officers arrived on the 31st floor and announced that gunfire is coming from directly above them. 10:15, the last shots are fired from the suspect per body-worn camera. So if you're looking at the math, 10 minutes.
Adam Housley is live in Las Vegas with the latest on the investigation. Adam.
Yeah, Melissa, I just was speaking with somebody this morning very close to this case, and he said the comment was he had weapons of war with no other application. That's the way they continue to look at this case. They say that he was combining and bringing these things together and planning for this attack here for at least 2 months at this location. Now, it comes as a report came out about the tanks. There's some gas tanks, jet fuel tanks, about 1,100 feet away from the room, actually almost adjacent to where we're standing right now. And we saw those inspected early Monday morning here. There were bullet holes, we're told, found in those tanks. Now, the report came out from the Las Vegas Review-Journal saying that he targeted those tanks. Every single person we've spoken to that's associated with this case says that is that's actually not likely, because he was doing what's called spraying. He was basically spraying everywhere at about 180 degrees, and the idea for him was to mow people down. That's not targeting, which would be going after those tanks. Meantime, as that report comes through, we're also hearing more about the men and women who responded. Those cameras they were wearing on their bodies show flashes coming off different parts of the building, which would help explain. There's been some conspiracy theories out there, but it would help explain, according to one of the men on one of those teams, why people might think they saw stuff on different levels and different floors, because the mirrored buildings show the flashes at different levels. It also explains why it took them a little bit longer to get exactly to the 32nd floor, because they had to make sure that they only had one shooter. It also comes as we hear more about the interview yesterday for several hours of Mary Lou Danley, the companion of the murderer. Now, we're told that she's been very cooperative from the beginning. Her attorney says really she knew nothing about what went down here.
I have not made a statement until now because I have been cooperating with the authorities, and I voluntarily flew back to America because I know that the FBI and Las Vegas Police Department wanted to talk to me. I will cooperate fully with their investigation. Anything I can do to help ease suffering and help in any way, I will do.
And so far, she has not been detained. It's a very important fact because once they believe maybe she knows more, I'm told she'll be detained and brought back here to Las Vegas. Final note, too, Melissa, they give it back to you. Once again, reminded to me this morning that nothing has been taken off the table here. Melissa?
Adam Helsley, thank you.
Right.
Meantime, Republicans in Congress are considering banning the use of so-called bump stocks. Those are the aftermarket devices that basically turn a semi-automatic weapon into an automatic one. The last Las Vegas shooter used them on his rifles, allowing him to kill dozens of people and injure hundreds more in a matter of 10 minutes.
Use them, say it doesn't make their weapon into an automatic weapon. It just, they can pull the trigger one time, hold it down, and it continuously fires rapidly after that. That mimics an automatic weapon, which we as Americans said decades ago that we would not allow for civilian use. So that's already a settled issue in American law. The issue is this an exception in the process? Is this something that needs to be confronted and changed? Those are all questions that are reasonable questions after an event like this, and quite frankly, were reasonable questions in 2010 to be able to ask as well before they even came on the market.
That's James Lankford, Republican senator from Oklahoma, saying maybe it's time to take a look at bump stocks. For more, let's bring in former Deputy Assistant to President George W. Bush, Brad Blakeman, and Isaac Wright, former Executive Director of Correct the Record Super PAC, the principal pro-Clinton Super PAC in last year's election. Brad, is it time? I mean, will this Republican Congress consider banning bump stocks?
I think it's absolutely time. Like any other regulation of any product in America, we should absolutely look back from time to time to make sure that our laws are consistent with public policy. And we have to remind our viewers that in 2010, President Obama, with his ATF, deemed that the bump stock was an accessory to a gun. It did not modify a gun. We know now that that's not true, that the bump stock can modify a semi-automatic to make it mimic a automatic weapon, which is illegal in America. So it makes perfect sense to do it. I'm all for it. We should have the debate. And if the law needs to be changed or regulations, let's do it.
Isaac, I assume that if Republicans are on board, Democrats are as well.
I think it's time that we fix the bump stock exception. I think Blake and I can agree on that. I do think, bless his heart, he has a little misunderstanding on both the law and on the technicality of how the technology works here. The law that we have that bans automatic weapons addresses springs in the action and the mechanics. The way an action, I'm a gun owner and a hunter myself, the way the action on a semi-automatic weapon works is that the recoil, the combustion operates the slide. That's what brings up the next chamber. This does not alter the mechanisms, which is what the ATF said correctly. This does not fall under the current law. This is an exception by altering the slide length so that instead the combustion bumps the slide back and forth to make it an automatic weapon. There's not a law to address this. That's why we need one. This is a way that a manufacturer found to circumvent and make an end run around the existing laws that ban automatic weapons. The ATF was accurate in their interpretation of that if you go back and look at what they said, and unfortunately the ATF doesn't have a vote in Congress to fix this. There was a bill that was brought up by Feinstein that would have addressed bump stocks a couple of years ago. The Republican majority killed that. Hopefully now we can see some progress made.
But on that score, Isaac, I mean, you're a gun owner, you know, it's a pretty simple design. Anybody who has these kinds of weapons and wants to build their own at-home bump stock can pretty much do it themselves. How do you legislate against that?
So it's actually not that easy to build a stock alteration like that. This is what's required of a kit and something to be manufactured. This is something we can regulate. We just have to update the laws to match the technology. This should not be a hard challenge. This is something Congress, if it has the will, can do.
And Brad, you welcome that debate?
I welcome the debate, but the Obama administration certainly could have done this themselves in 2010. They chose not to. I disagree with Isaac. Certainly, the bump stock is not an accessory item. By his own admission, it modifies the operation of the gun to do something that the manufacturer did not intend to do, and certainly the law didn't intend. So Obama dropped the ball, and then in 2012, after Sandy Hook, they could have again revisited this item. They did not do it. Unfortunately, it takes a tragedy for us now to revisit this item and make sure that the American people are kept safe, or safer than they were prior to the bump stocks being used in an illegal manner.
Blake and I agree on the end goal here of American safety and how we do it with legislation. I think we may disagree on the history of the facts. I'd go with what the ATF said at the time. I think you can read a copy of that online.
All right, we'll dig into that a bit more and continue this debate. Certainly Congress is going to. Isaac, Brad, thanks both.
Thank you so much.
Fire consumes a school that was more than 100 years old. Why investigators say water may be the real cause of the building's destruction. And the girlfriend of the killer behind the deadly Las Vegas mass shooting says she had no clue about his intentions. But could she still face charges in the case? Our legal panel weighs in next. But first, here's the attorney for Mary Lou Danley.
I want to let everyone know that we are fully cooperating with the FBI and the Las Vegas Police Department about these horrible, unspeakable acts of violence.
Hurricane Irma is being blamed for the destruction of a Florida elementary school. The fire broke out last month shortly after the storm struck, likely damaging the Tampa school's electrical system, according to a new report from investigators. The fire collapsed the roof on one side of that 106-year-old building, displacing 329 students and 49 employees.
The girlfriend of Stephen Paddock, the gunman in the Las Vegas massacre, says she had no idea he planned to carry out the attack. FBI agents interviewed Mary Lou Danley yesterday as part of their ongoing investigation to try to determine why Paddock opened fire on innocent people at a concert. In a statement read by her attorney, Danley claims she had no warning and explained why she traveled to the Far East weeks before the mass shooting. Joining me now is Wendy Patrick, a veteran prosecutor and a trial attorney, and Heather Hansen, a trial attorney as well. Wendy, let me start with you. So what she said was that he had said he found a cheap ticket here, go on your way, go see your family, which she certainly wanted to do. When she got there, he wired her the $100,000 and said, buy a house, this is my gift to you. And she worried that what he was really doing was trying to break up with her. Is that plausible?
You know, Melissa, I'd say law enforcement views this woman as its best lead. She is viewing the whole situation through rose-colored glasses. This has been her boyfriend for several years. Remember, this is the proverbial axe murderer next door, is what we all thought. Oh, he seems like such a nice guy. That's what she says. But actually, Melissa, she is contradicted by many people that have been interviewed that actually saw the two of them together, that knew him, that lived near him, that knew his gambling habits. He does not appear to be such a nice guy after all. And unlike this he snapped theory, it appears that he actually followed a pathway to violence from grievance to attack, just like everyone else. The girlfriend appears to be more of a companion at this point than a co-conspirator.
But we don't know what the grievance is, right? I mean, you say he followed that path. Yeah, we don't know. Heather, also it reminds me a little bit of the Boston bomber case, where at first, the wife claimed to be in the dark. She had no idea. I mean, it was similar, and then it turns out, yes, she did.
Well, it's almost exactly the same, Melissa, because in that case, she was investigated. Catherine Russell was the wife. She was quite subservient, just as it appears from many reports that this companion was quite subservient. And with all of the investigation and all of the attempts to see if they could press charges, ultimately, Catherine Russell, the wife of the Boston bomber, did not meet up with any charges. I think here as well, I think Wendy's point is well taken. This woman is the best clue, this and perhaps his phone and his computer, computer as to a motive, as to where he was in the time before this action, as to what exactly may have been going on. So I think that they need her cooperation, and I think she'll continue to give it.
Wendy, I mean, what could she have done that would be criminal? There's a long way from knowing and doing something that you can be arrested for.
That's right. She'd have to have some kind of an involvement. And she apparently, at least by all accounts, had absolutely no idea. But Heather makes a good point about the forensics, and so do you. This man is different than almost all the other mass shooters we've had in recent years because he didn't have a digital footprint. So investigators are getting out from behind their computers and actually doing great, good old-fashioned, on-the-ground investigation, talking to people that knew him. Once they put all that together, and by the way, the girlfriend can help locate other witnesses who are more objective and can give those kinds of assessments that'll help us crack the case. It does not appear, at least at this point, that charges will be forthcoming as far as she's concerned.
Yeah, I mean, and Heather, you know, probably the most important element at this point is going to be technology. You know, did he have a phone? Did he have a computer? What does that show him doing? And financial records. I mean, where did all this money come from? I, for one, don't understand how an accountant and a former mailman could have millions and millions and millions of dollars. You don't win gambling in Vegas over the long term.
Well, the money and the knowledge, right, Melissa? Because the things that he did, I mean, outfitting his car to be a bomb, getting these guns, putting the risers up, I mean, these are things that take knowledge. And one would imagine that he got that knowledge perhaps through the internet. I would be surprised if he didn't somehow access some sort of digital technology in order to get some of this information. In addition, because he was such a high roller gambler, we may have cameras that show some of his comings and goings that perhaps could lead to some help. Unfortunately, these things take time. And the investigators are doing a wonderful job, as Wendy said, going step by step and doing a real tough investigation.
Wendy, what is so unusual about this case so far is that we don't have a clue to motive. And generally, by this time, you know, it feels like you would have found a manifesto. A neighbor would have heard him grumbling about something. You know, there's really been no insight into that.
Melissa, I am confident that patience will be a virtue in this case. Because of the lack of the digital footprint, it is harder to get to the motive as fast as we would like. We understand now that there was a note left in the room. We're heard it's not a suicide note, but we're learning more facts and circumstances. Now, and we're learning them piece by piece because law enforcement can't compromise the integrity of the investigation by telling us everything we want to know. But I'm confident we're going to get there, and maybe even by this time tomorrow we'll be a little bit closer. But there had to have been a motive. We'll find it.
All right, ladies, thanks to both of you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thousands of refugees from around the world are illegally crossing the U.S. border into Canada amid uncertainty over how the Trump administration's policies could affect asylum seekers in the U.S. We're live in Montreal. And a judge rules against a mother who refused to vaccinate her son. What's next for this Michigan mom?
I take full responsibility for my actions, and it was not my intent to disrespect Your Honor or to disobey the court's orders. I stand here today scared and vulnerable, begging the court to understand that I'm not a lazy parent.